Metal Gear games are really popular and have sparked multiple weird memes from them.
No, that is not Solid Snake. This is the enemy, and he's here on his knees.
Us. Kept you waiting, huh?
That's a nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
I was wrong. You're not greedy. You're batshit insane!
It has piqued my interest a certain amount of times, but I never got the chance to play any of the games as I sold my PlayStation for gambling money. But having finally won the gazillion jackpot, I could finally buy almost all the games and talk about them. The timeline of the games is really complicated, and so to make it easy for both you and me, I'm going to talk about them in the release order with the exception of Metal Gear Solid 4, as it's the last game in the franchise story-wise. I thought this would be a good idea as almost every person out there has played the franchise except for me. The only real knowledge I have from the game series is Phantom Pain, which I loved, but it has been a while since I played that and people have regarded it as the worst game in the franchise story-wise. Hearing that, it surprised me and made my expectations quite high for the older games, as I really enjoyed the story of Phantom Pain despite not knowing the overall lore and characters. This video is part 1 of however many videos there will be, and in the end, after all the games, I'm gonna combine them all into a massive video. The only real purpose for this is money first of all, but also giving you a content to watch while I work on other games and not spending 10 years working on a single project. I guess you can call it a journey, with covering one or multiple games in one part, then when it's all finished having all the videos in one place for you to have a long video to watch, or for people who are just curious and want a long ass video about an idiot who talks about all the games with no prior experience. I played the Master Collection on Steam, which wasn't really well received as they just used the emulator on the existing PC port of the games, but being the most accessible version out there and not altering the gameplay or lore, I used it. For the games I can't play through Steam, I'll be trying to play them on the older hardware, and worst case scenario I will just try to emulate them. In case I won't be able to play a game or make it work for me, I'll just briefly talk about the story if it's relevant and make some observations from other sources like gameplay videos or whatnot. Saying all of this, I won't be talking about any of the technical stuff like crashes, frame drops, or the game bugging out, as I don't know if it was like this in the original game or if the Master Collection's fault or the emulator's fault or the hardware's fault. Since the Master Collection 2 hasn't come out yet as I'm making this video, I won't be covering it for obvious reasons. But if the Master Collection 2 actually comes out alongside the Snake Eater remake, I will maybe try to make a comparison video having played the original one now and playing the remake to see if they actually hold up to one another. The main point of these videos is mostly to give an overview and kind of analyze almost every game in the franchise, since there are games I can't play or too broke to pay for, and give a fresh perspective on them since I didn't grow up with them, I don't have any fond memories of them, and I'm walking into them with an open mind. I'm not biased, I'm not expecting to love the games or hate them, I'm just curious to play all of them. So no, I'm not a big time Metal Gear Solid fan and I never really understood why people praise them, but maybe I'll be able to change my mind after this series is done. So the quest, if that's what you like to call them because you're an idiot like me, for the video aside from the previous one is an overall overview of the games. Does the franchise hold up after all this time? Are the older games as good as people have been saying? And does the franchise have a good story? But a personal side quest for myself is to see if the older games actually do have a better story than Phantom Pain. With people saying that it's the weakest one in the franchise story-wise, I am really curious to see what they will do because I really did like the story in Phantom Pain, and probably because I did not have any prior knowledge to the lore and the characters and what happened before. But too long didn't read. For people who haven't played the games, yes, I highly recommend you playing them despite their age, and the first 4 games being really accessible now with the Master Collection, you should definitely give them a go. But if you want to stay here for a while and listen to me talk a bit more in depth about all the games, then stick around. First 2 Metal Gear games aren't as technical as the modern ones, but it's not to say that they don't try or do unique gameplay features for its time. The first game is the shortest one by far, not really having a long story and gameplay, which means I won't focus too much on the gameplay as it's short. And it's only in the second game when they try to do more stuff and implement a better story with its length and just more in depth. Starting off with Metal Gear that takes place in 1995 on our timeline and follows one of the protagonists, Solid Snake. That's one of the key characters in the franchise. And why not? We can also have a character timeline, or rather a snake timeline, to keep track of all the snakes that are in the franchise. Solid Snake looks like the generic war hero character, not really rocking his iconic look later on into the franchise. He receives orders from Big Boss on the Codec and wants him to rescue an agent, Gray Fox, since he has been missing for some time now. Gray Fox was sent on this mission to infiltrate the base, but not having any contact with him, they sent Solid Snake instead to rescue him. The base Solid Snake is entering is Outer Heaven that has a weapon called the Metal Gear that is supposed to be one of the strongest weapons out there and is a countermeasurement for the nuclear weapons. Solid Snake is a rookie at this point, and there is a reason why the Big Boss sent him instead of a veteran soldier to handle this mission. Rescuing Gray Fox, they try to finish the mission together, but as it turns out, Big Boss is actually the leader of Outer Heaven and worked for Foxhound, the organization Solid works for, to delay their mission in destroying Metal Gear, and hence why he sent Solid Snake thinking he wouldn't even survive this mission. Snake fights Big Boss and sets the base to self-destruct, but Big Boss somehow manages to escape the facility and take the whole base with him somehow. The gameplay of Metal Gear is really simple, comparing it to the arcade games, but it can still be fun in its own way. It functions as far as it can and works as a game. It's really bad at saving your progress and sometimes being able to send you back 20 minutes in your gameplay, but being really short, it's not really an issue. Presuming that Big Boss is dead, a new character pops out and takes his place as Foxhound's leader, Roy Campbell. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake apparently came into existence because Konami released a really bad version of Metal Gear to the NES, and Kojima was so mad that he had to go to the studio and start to cook another Metal Gear game to show them how it's done. There are only a few sources that confirmed this, like an interview I found, but it was really hard to verify if the interview was actually legit or not, but I'm just gonna assume it's real. Since we're already on the subject of Konami and Kojima, I guess we could talk a little bit about it. For those who don't know, before the game's release, Metal Gear Solid Phantom Pain, Kojima was dropped by Konami for an unknown reason. Since Metal Gear Solid Phantom Pain was my first game, I do remember this controversy or drama between Konami and Kojima, but I always thought a few years later that we would have an actual confirmed source or a confirmed reason why Konami dropped Kojima, but to this day there still isn't. It's just been a lot of speculation throughout the years, but one of the most well-known game theories is that Kojima apparently blew the budget on Phantom Pain. He had like 40 million, but he tried to go over 60 million and Konami just couldn't take it anymore because apparently he has done it in the past as well. But as said, it's just speculations basically because there's no real reason. But why I'm talking about this is because there's a kind of a discord between Konami and Kojima, especially Kojima, with people loving him or hating him. So the people who love Kojima basically of course hate Konami because they dropped him and he's essentially the guy who made Metal Gear. And those who don't like Kojima still don't like Konami because Konami seems to be one of the worst companies to work for in the current decade. I was always under the impression that Kojima was really beloved by the gaming community and there's no haters towards him. But in the recent years I've seen a lot of discourse about him that he went all Hollywood and that people don't really respect his decisions in the past few years. One of the big reasons people don't like Kojima is that he replaced David Hayter, the voice actor for Solid Snake, to Kiefer Sutherland. But he was supposed to even be replaced in the even earlier games like Snake Eater or even Metal Gear Solid 4. But apparently it wasn't Hideo Kojima's call to replace him in the earlier games, but the evil Konami that wanted a famous name or whatever. I think it's important to say what is happening outside the game because it does affect the game, just like with David Hayter, the voice actor, but even some chunks of the gameplay can be purely missing, like in Phantom Pain. But Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, despite just being 3 years apart in development, they really improved a lot of the gameplay aspect and the story mainly. The game is set here on our timeline in 1999 and still following our main protagonist Solid Snake as he infiltrates a new base in Zanzibar, holding a doctor that Solid is supposed to rescue. The game has more loading screens compared to the first game as they have a bigger map now and a lot more mechanics to show for it. You can distract enemies with sounds, being able to hide in places alongside picking up a wide variety of weapons. I did not have fun with either of the games, but I did have more fun with Metal Gear 2 rather than the first game. If I was born in the 70s and played this game, I would have creamed my pants, but replaying it now, it doesn't amaze me as much. Despite that, I can still respect the game as it's really interesting and makes you scratch your head and actually think how to play it and approach the different levels. If I owned the game physically, I would have had more fun as certain sections makes you use of the game manual that the game came out with to progress further. I don't have it, so it wasn't as fun. The Master Collection actually has a game manual in the menu, but you have to exit the game to go to the section and then find it there. And while it's a nice touch, it's really slow and not as immersive as having a physical copy of the manual. Gameplay wise, there are more options and more dialogue, or rather text, to give you more context into the universe and the different characters. It was still amazing for a game from its time to actually give you feedback of what you're doing, meaning if you pick up a cardboard box, you can call Campbell and learn more on how to use it and what for. The biggest downside for me was the game was in 2D, and with that I mean it's really hard to play a stealth game in a 2D aspect. There's a tailing segment later on into the game. I was getting so mad because the enemy I was supposed to follow kept noticing me despite me being behind trees. I guess it's a skill issue. Maybe now that I think about it, Metal Gear might have been the first game to actually introduce a tailing mission in a game. Yeah, I couldn't verify that information, so I'm just gonna say it's true. The game even has boss fights that are fairly fun and hard, and bullshit ones like Black Ninja, who's not really hard but just annoying as he teleports around and just tosses shurikens at you that track you. Another thing I didn't like is the fucking audio in this game, as it's loud despite me having it at a 1 out of 100, and it still bursts my eardrums at certain segments. It also suffers from the same issue as the first game and the upcoming game to some extent, where after you clear an area, all the items and enemies respawn alongside with it, so you can cheese this by just clearing an area, waiting for the ammo to respawn, and just stock up fully on the ammunition. It is an issue for this game and the one before, because the game heavily implies that you're supposed to be scarce with your materials and be careful on how you use your different gadgets like bombs, grenades, pistols, whatnot. There's a wider cast in the second game that helps with the gameplay and story, like Campbell, Master, and Holly. There are different puzzles in the game where you have to pick up different items to progress further, like key cards, and figure them out in what door they're supposed to go to. But what I hate most about this game is that it doesn't tell you shit. Of course, the only real source of information you have is from your codec when you're calling your teammates to tell you where you need to go. The only thing you get is how to use a weapon, and that's it. Want to know where to go? Go fuck yourself. I like the idea of me exploring and having a sense of where to go, but the game executes it so poorly in some segments of the game. The game is capable of giving you small hints of where to go, but then just gives up at certain points for whatever reason. And trust me, it is god awful at times, as there's a lot of fucking backtracking in this game. I have to give them credit somehow for making it manageable with having certain fast travel stations with you being able to transport by truck with you being in a cardboard box. The only map you have is the minimap on your radar, giving you a small sense of where you are, but when you're playing the game for the first time and don't know the layout of the base, it makes sense. You're immersed, you're a spy infiltrating a base. What doesn't make sense is your teammates calling you on your codec and letting you know you're supposed to be in hangar 13 when you don't even know the fucking layout of the base, so how the fuck are you supposed to know where it is? What I never really understood in the game and for the upcoming games is the romances. In this game we meet Gustava, that is in fact in cahoots with Grey Fox as we learn, but Snake showcases love for her. I guess it can be explained as Solid is just a flirty character or a playboy, but sometimes it doesn't make sense as he flirts with Holly constantly over the codec and promises her a Christmas dinner only not to deliver, and then later on going and declares his love for Gustava and is really heartbroken about her. The rest of the story is basically progressing further into the base, seeing the different children in this outer heaven, and eventually learning that there's a new Metal Gear and Snake's friends Grey Fox is working for Big Boss now. Confronting Grey Fox, they get some nice closure about them being friends and finally accepting one another as enemies, and he's happy about Snake being the one who killed him. Final boss fight of the game is Snake against Big Boss, and before that they have a little talk about how they're not so different, them and I. Big Boss says even if he kills him, he'll still be just a tool to the army. He'll just be a soldier. He'll be living as a soldier for the rest of his life, even after all his accomplishments. The fight between Big Boss at the end is actually quite interesting, as all the items you've gathered throughout the game are lost, and you have to resort to the items that are in the area, such as a hairspray and a lighter, to burn him up, and essentially you have to find different key cards to get into rooms to gather those items to actually kill him. After Snake finally kills Big Boss, he escapes along with Holly and the game ends. The game showcases you a statistic at the end of the game and has two difficulties that you can pick, original or easy. Depending on your difficulty and how many times you've died and whatnot, it will show you what rating you got at the end of the game, which gives players a little bit more motivation to maybe try to replay the game and speedrun it to get the best statistic. So after finishing the game, you get a game mode focusing only on the boss fights of the game, where you can see how long it takes you to defeat them and whatnot. It's semi-side content, but I can still appreciate it since the game is fairly long and games back then weren't exactly known to having amazing side content. Seen a lot of people saying that we learn in this game about the information that Big Boss is actually Solid Snake's father and why he goes up on the list, but he actually doesn't say it. Metal Gear Solid reveals that information to us, but we actually never learned this in the second game. Big Boss is quite an interesting character, and it kinda sucks that he has so little screen time in both of the games. Although it is somehow admirable that they managed to tie Big Boss in the newest entry of Metal Gear to an old game from 1989. It is quite impressive how the game portrays its world building. Going through the outer heaven, you can see different children, and I do like that they show that Big Boss isn't all that mean to them. They actually have a place to live and call home. And I've gathered this just by playing the second game. With the context of Phantom Pain, it makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense. It's really confusing thinking of the different games and how they tie to each other. Knowing this context in the second game, it can feel like Kojima just added kids into Phantom Pain because, oh, there were kids in the second game. At first, I wasn't gonna play the first two games as I thought the story in those wouldn't transfer over up to the upcoming games or even the gameplay in those games. Many of the story aspects, such as Outer Heaven, does play a massive part later on into the franchise, and even the characters like Campbell, Solid Snake, Big Boss. What I've noticed with Metal Gear alongside other medias like movies or even other games is that trying to tie in something new with something that's already written. Phantom Pain is really heavily tied into the first two games, I would say, and while it does a pretty good job at it, it's still a bit lackluster, and I imagine that Kojima didn't want the outcome that happened in the first two games with the events that are happening in Phantom Pain. The game does interesting things, such as being able to interact enemies with sounds that I didn't even know about until I finished the game, so that's something. Like I said before, even just after the first two games into the franchise, it has a way of not showing you everything despite being really information heavy focused. It's cool to get all the information you need from the codec, but because the game is scripted in a way where the codec gives you information relevant to that area, meaning you could get completely useless information in an area where the game feels you no longer need information about. It's not really after playing Metal Gear Solid that I understood what the story was going on for, but as their own games they work as being a 80s thriller spy movie. L ratio too long didn't read. The story is okay for its time, and of course isn't completely fair since there's a massive time difference between the games, but okay, let's just leave it at that. It's hard to say that people were hyping up these games as no one really talks about them just as much as Metal Gear Solid and the other games into the franchise. It does seem like these games are kind of forgotten and nobody really wants to talk about them, just browse the wiki and quickly learn about this story just to get into the other games. Both of these games have their charm, and I can say that they somehow hold up to this day. It's still surprising seeing games this old actually do something interesting and having a story alongside with it. It's nothing amazing for these times, but back then you can bet your ass people were amazed at this, and I would have been too. I would put both of these games in the thumbs up list as they both tried something in that era, and despite their age I had my fun with them even though I was raging at some parts of the games. Metal Gear Solid still followed Solid Snake as the protagonist, Campbell and Master Miller as backup respectively. The game is here on our timeline, set in 2005, and starts off with Snake coming back from retirement because for some reason instead of going on with a Christmas dinner with Holly Molly, I'm just gonna call her Holly, he decided to fuck off to Alaska and be there. But he's back on another mission, yet to infiltrate another base containing nukes that are being kept by Foxhound and the next generation special forces who are threatening to launch them if the government doesn't meet their demands. And not wanting to go into those demands, they send Snake to take care of it. Foxhound is now rogue as Campbell is no longer the commander of that group and is instead led by another man who I won't mention just yet. The next generation special forces are genome soldiers, meaning that they're genetically enhanced with Big Boss genes since he was the perfect soldier even though he died to a homemade flamethrower by me in the previous game. The beginning of this game is already strong as it already builds off the previous game and rewards you for actually playing the games. It makes sense that they only send Snake as they can't send an army to alarm them and they already know how capable Snake is, even earning him the legendary title of Solid Snake, which is kinda justified as he destroyed not only one but two Metal Gears that are one of the most powerful weapons on Earth. Metal Gear Solid introduced the semi-3D aspect of these games after the first two. It allows you to actually see the area and the dimensions in 3D person, but now you actually have the option to go into first person to scout out the area and see how it looks and oh my god, these graphics. The game is really old, but honestly I feel the graphics are still really good even though they are pixelated. It gives off a really good vibe from it, and while it was hard for me to adjust in the beginning, it got better as it went on. The best comparison I can make is the old God of War games. While the graphics are still old to this day and look fucking dog shit, the vibe and the area and the world are just amazing yet to this day. The game goes out of its way to have a cold breath emit from the character and is somewhat robust with how the different characters behave and walk. Of course, the faces of the characters are horrifying, but what makes up for it are the codec calls you get throughout the game. The codec has the best feature in the game, as you can almost call your spirits at any time to get clues where you need to go or give you information about what's going on. Pictures in the codec move as the characters talk and give a nice response when you watch the conversation, and helps you to get a broader picture about the characters. Equipping new items, you can always call your team to learn what to do with them. Natasha is your weapon expert, giving you tips on how to use your weapons to the best of your advantage. Campbell is still here leading the operation and gives you overall information. Mei Ling is the tech support that allows you to save the game through her. Master Miller gives you overall survivor tips like in the previous games about nature, how to avoid enemies, and how to use your environment to your advantage. It's not as bad as in the first two games where I didn't know where to go, but there were still some segments where I just had to look up a guide on where to go because there is no map and I don't know the layout of this base, so I couldn't possibly know where to go or what item to pick up. I feel as the codec is a double-edged sword, as in Sons of Liberty they actually did something good and implemented a way better system on where you need to go and letting you know where you need to go and your current objectives, but in this game it was kinda hard to keep track of them. Having never played these games, I instantly recognized the different sound and lines from the game, which is really beautiful and weird since you're used to hearing them in a meme form or something else. What caught me by surprise is that I didn't know that there would be so much meta in the dialogue and in the gameplay, as the characters flat out say to you what button to press and what to do in real life. Like I said before, the game has improved massively from the first two, but still sticks to the dot map, letting you know where your enemies are and where you are. But now having a radar to have a rough estimate of where the enemies can spot you from. Infiltrating the base, we're supposed to rescue the DARPA chief that explains to Snake that they are building a new Metal Gear again, Metal Gear Rex, and they need both of the president's Armtech keys to get it ready to launch. But before being able to rescue the DARPA chief, he suddenly dies to a heart attack, and the prisoner next door, Meryl, hears it and takes action as she knocks out one of the guards in the cells and somehow takes his outfit and releases Snake from his cell. Meryl lets us know that she's the niece of Campbell and has always trained to be a soldier but has never actually fired a weapon, and as she says this, the enemies are alerted, so we need to take care of them. Gaslighting her into shooting them, she goes off on a huge panic attack and just leaves Snake to himself, but not before having a dramatic ass shot, which I'm not even kidding has relevance later on into the game. So pretty great introduction overall, but I was wondering one huge thing during this part, and that was, how did Snake intend to get the DARPA chief out of the cell? Did he want to sneak him through the vent? After the DARPA chief dies, you just stand in the cell, it can't escape in any way, just waiting for Mara to rescue you, so... After she leaves us, we get a vision of sorts, and calling this encounter in, we learn that there was Psycho Mantis, a Foxhound operative who has psychometric powers. During this call, we get the information that Solid is injected with nanomachines by Naomi, the researcher focusing on the gene science, and they allow the command center to inject morphine and other enhancements into his bloodstream. Codec has to be one of the best segments of the game, as you wind down from the action in the game and focus more on the world building of both Solid and the other characters in the cast. There are a bunch of explanations throughout these calls, which is why Solid doesn't freeze to death in this weather, with him having an advanced sneaking suit that keeps his temperature and doesn't let in the outside cold. With the DARPA chief dead now, we need to find the Armtech president to get his keycard, and to get to him you need to blow up this wall in this basement, and god I wished I played the first two games first. In the second game there are puzzles where you need to blow up different walls, but I didn't know that because I started with this game, so without knowing I ran past the wall I was supposed to blow up and ended circling up the map like 20 times until I had to watch a guide on how to progress further. It's kind of the same issue here with the codec, because they do tell you that you need to get into an isolated room because they don't know where the president is, but because the game is scripted in a way where it gives you the information relevant to that area, they just tell you to save him. They don't tell you to blow up a wall or anything. At least it didn't happen for me. So yeah, take it from me. Play the first games, you have a better understanding of the mechanics because they do somehow transpire into the future games. It was quite surprising to see how much stuff they bring back from the old games into the newer ones. Would have been just like tossing a grenade. I felt familiar with it despite just playing Phantom Pain. Getting to the president, he's strapped to a pole with a bunch of wires, and we get introduced to Revolver Ocelot and gives us the first boss battle. The boss fights in these games are massively better than the previous ones, but the shooting mechanic is just not it. I died like 200 times in the first shootout since I didn't even know how to shoot. So in order to fire a gun, you need to press and hold the square button or X button, whatever controller you're using, and then release it. It's simple for pistols since they're semi-automatic, but for rifles it's god awful as you just end up spamming the shoot button and praying to god you hit something. But I much rather prefer this than the 2D boss battles. Defeating Ocelot, we get interrupted by a robot ninja who cuts off his hand and leaves us alone with the president. Talking to the president, he says that the nuclear threat around the world is far from over and America needed a weapon to counteract the nukes, hence why they're building Metal Gear. In order to disable Metal Gear, we need his keycard, but he gave it to Meryl, so the next step is to locate her. But before going, the president seems to also get a heart attack and wants to say that Snake is being used, but we don't know yet as he dies before he can tell us. There's a cool feature as the president says that Meryl's frequency is on the back of the CD, meaning the box of the actual game in real life, but I don't have it since I bought it on Steam, so I had to look it up and it kind of ruins the immersion, such as the first games. Going outside, we talk to Meryl and decide to find the guy who designed Metal Gear, Dr. Hal Emmerich, who's stashed in a storage unit. Being outside, we get a strange call from a fan, apparently telling us that we're stepping into a minefield and doesn't elaborate further. Getting past the mines, we get the second boss fight of the game with Raven being in a tank, and it's alright. There wasn't anything special with Revolver Ocelot, but here you have to disable the main cannon using the chaff grenades and then tossing frag grenades into the pilot seat. It's a little bullshit since you can either cheese the boss fight by being really close to the tank so he can't shoot you, or you take like 100 hits from the cannon by being really far away. Somehow, despite us blowing up the tank, Raven is still alive. Like, there were two guys in the tank with him and only one of them died. Later on, they're trying to give us some explanation that he's a supernatural being. But I mean, come on, the fucking tank exploded. And like, the other guy is just a normal guy. How the fuck did he survive? Going further, we get another call from the fan telling us what to do. And seemingly, he seems to care for Snake in a way which he does not want him to get hurt. Getting into a hallway, we see a bloodbath of a fight. And going into an office, we meet Dr. Emmerich. But not before getting ambushed by the Cyber Ninja and him wanting to fight with Snake. Yeah, Cyber Ninja is Grey Fox, and it's kind of ruined if you played the first game with him mysteriously calling you and helping you and repeating the same dialogue he had in the second game. We have a boss fight with him, and I have to say it has to be my favorite one. He has several stages to him and it's actually cleverly made. So in the second stage, he wants you to go hand in hand with him, saying that if you're a true warrior, you do not need a weapon. Being wholesome, I whipped out my pistol only to notice that he's attacking me with his sword. I called him a hypocrite, now realizing that I'm the hypocrite with me using a fucking weapon against him. The first stage, he uses camouflage to hide, but it's kinda easy to spot him once you know his spots. But if you're having a hard time seeing him, you can actually use the sound cues of him jumping to know his locations. Defeating him, he's satisfied with the fight, I guess, and runs off, letting us talk to Dr. Emmerich, who seconds ago pissed his pants at the sight of the ninja. He gives us some backstory to his gamer tag Otacon and is a big time anime fan. I didn't even know this, but apparently Otacon is a cosplay convention in Japan, so yeah, there's that. He tells us that he was forced to work on Metal Gear, but somehow enjoyed it, as he got into science to build robots like in the animes he likes to watch. Not wanting to drag Otacon along, Snake suggests he hides, and luckily for him he has a stealth suit that he stole from the R&B apartment, letting him hide in plain sight. We contact Meryl only for her to get noticed somehow by the guards and decides to blend in with her current outfit, so the relevant scene of her ass comes into play here as you need to spot her by the way she walks. She gets spooked and rushes to the ladies' room where we have a heart-to-heart conversation with her, how she always wanted to be a soldier for her dad but never fired a weapon at anyone until today. And we get to see a wholesome side of Snake as he is compassionate with her but is quickly passive-aggressive with her when he sees that she has a bigger gun than him, the Desert Eagle. He tries to change guns with her but he's stuck with the shitty small USB. What's funny is that you can actually hit Meryl and she gives you the biggest slap in existence game that sends you flying back, meaning she could be a pretty good soldier. Having Meryl's card now, we can go through the other sections of the building and we encounter another boss, Psycho Mantis. So most of you probably know the Psycho Mantis boss fight and it works really well. The boss fight itself is good, but the interaction with Psycho Mantis is really good for 1998, as he breaks the fourth wall and reads your actual memory card in your PlayStation and comments on what games you have played. Since I'm playing on the Master Collection, the reveal is not as good, as I don't have any other games, since you know I don't have a memory card in my PC like in a PlayStation. So the boss fight works in a way where Psycho Mantis actually reads your mind, meaning he predicts your controller inputs. Despite this, I had my big brain thought where I figured since the game is clever, it wants me to do something else since he can read my mind. So being really smart, I switched to my keyboard, and yeah, so it's a really cool fight and really worked for its time, but the port for PC for me at least didn't work out. What I had to do is go into the settings itself and change the controller input to the second port, and doing this in the menu is not as immersive as actually doing it. It might have been just a problem on my end, as I did try to unplug the controller and use the keyboard, but to no avail. Seeing other people play this fight, it seems they had no issue with just switching to a keyboard, but some of them had emulated the game and others just made it work for them on the Master Collection. And in this boss fight, Hideo has an Easter egg here. Well, one of the attacks Mantis does is that he switches off the TV for a second, displaying Hideo instead of video. Get it? Psycho Mantis is really smart, as he uses Meryl as a puppet to distract Snake since he knows that he cares for her somewhat. This is another thing that I noticed after finishing the game with how rushed the relationship between Meryl and Snake is. Like, don't get me wrong, they established the relationship further in this game and even further on into the fourth game. But it kind of feels like the game doesn't know what Snake wants. Like in the first two games we had Holly and then Cassandra or whatever her fuck name is, and now it's Meryl. It kind of feels like Snake is just a blank character. This is something Hideo himself confirmed, as he felt that he was just a blank character in Metal Gear Solid at least, which I don't really understand since he had sort of a backstory in the first two games, but whatever. It goes again with what I was saying about Solid Snake's character development being written after the fact that he's already been introduced. First two games already dive deep that he kinda cares for women and he's like a playboy character that romances everybody and that he has some honor to him, so I don't know why they're trying to do it again in Metal Gear Solid. Defeating Psycho Mantis, he tells us a little bit about himself, how he was always doing bad shit and didn't have a good childhood. Since he's defeated, he decides to help Solid Snake on how to progress further into the base, as he has nothing else to lose, and to his surprise it actually felt good helping someone for once. Snake opens up a bit to Meryl, not giving her his full name, and Meryl notices how lonely Snake truly is, mainly just focused on the battlefield and nothing more. Going outside of the room, there are half huskies and half dogs outside, and they're pretty terrifying as it's really dark and their eyes just glow red. This is what I like about the game so far, as you're rewarded by exploring. When I first got to the wolf area, I felt good as I knew I picked up some night vision goggles and thermal goggles helping me see more clearly in the dark, and it was all optional. You can still play through majority of the game without picking up every single item on the level, but if you do, you get rewarded for it. And yes, I do know that basically every single game has this, but what I'm saying is that it doesn't shoehorn that you need to explore, such as Suicide Kill the Justice League, where you have a level requirement, you need to explore the map and do other missions before progressing further. Here is completely optional. Although in this game it's almost impossible to not explore it, as you're likely to get lost and don't know where you're going, so you're gonna discover hidden areas and whatnot. Getting in a hollow sorts, Meryl shows us the way only to get shot by Sniper Wolf? Is this where she got her name from? What the Snake realizes who she is immediately, as she has a reputation of stealing content and being the best sniper out there. She's using Meryl as bait to draw Snake out, but she could have just shot Snake when he was literally right behind Meryl. I guess she didn't want to take any chances, she didn't want to shoot him through Meryl, but it kind of feels like they're over dramatizing this scene. But Snake shows sympathy and wants to help Meryl, so in order to even have a chance to save her, he needs to find a sniper rifle to stand a chance with Sniper Wolf, so we have to go all the way back to the facility. As you may know, the old games used to have a lot of backtracking to pad out the game time, and while Metal Gear Solid has a lot of backtracking, it's nowhere near as tedious and boring as the first two games. There were only a handful of segments where I had to go back to an area I was already in, and when I had to, I didn't mind it, as I already knew the layout of the base and knew where I could find the items I couldn't get before. Getting the sniper rifle, we can finally go back and meet Sniper Wolf, but the sniper controls in this game are just bad. The shooting itself is meh, but sniping is a whole nother level. You can take a drug to steady your breathing and let you aim more steadily, but it's so god awful controlling the scope. I really do like that you go all over the place with the scope when you get shot, but having these slow turning mechanics with the scope is just so boring and makes sniping harder than it needs to be. And I don't really understand why they have this, because getting shot and having the scope all over the place makes sense, the realism, right? But then why is it so slow when you're aiming down the sight? Like, it's not like that in real life. I do like that you actually have to go prone in order to even scope in with the sniper rifle, but the problem with that is that you barely use it. I never used the sniper rifle after the sniper wolf fight. There was only one segment where I had to use it, and it was on a catwalk because I couldn't even see the enemy, so I had to stand next to the door, scope in, and then kill them, because essentially I couldn't kill them because the game didn't render them in for me. Feeding Sniper Wolf, we go to try and find Meryl, but they rig the door so they capture us. Solid sits in a chair, or rather stands in a chair, and is being interrogated by Liquid and Ocelot. Liquid is actually the leader of this facility and the leader behind the terrorist attack that wants the government to give in to his demands. He's although frustrated that the government does not give in to his demands and calls Solid his big brother, but doesn't elaborate further, instead letting Ocelot torture Snake to get the info about where the other keycards are for the nuke. Ocelot says that you can either fight for your life or give up and let Meryl die. Fighting through the torture, Solid gets sent to a cell with the DARPA chief, but he's already dead, and he has been for several days now, as his body is rotting despite him only dying some hours ago. We contact the Colonel and Naomi on what to do, and they basically tell us to suck it up and wait for something to happen. Naomi opens up a little bit to Snake so he doesn't focus on the pain, and basically tells him that she got into genetics because she never knew her real parents and wanted to study it to learn about them. In this dialogue, she also says that we need to put our controller on our arm and it vibrates, and it's basic but it's really fun. It kind of immerses you into the game world. Having an idea, we call Otacon, who says that he can get to us and try to help us with a packet of ketchup and food for some reason. I'm proud to say this, that I thought of this myself. With seeing the DARPA chief dead, I could fake my own death with the packet of ketchup, and to my surprise it actually worked. But I got too happy as it worked, and as the guard came into the cell, I got up too early, letting him get away and lock me away in the cell again. So I had to endure the spam minigame a third time, and let me tell you, it's fucking hard pressing one button. So what happens instead is that the Cyber Ninja, aka Grey Fox, helps Snake out in the cell by just cutting the door, and when we contact Otacon, he kinda makes fun of Solid for not picking up his idea on how to get out, even though I used the ketchup to fake my death with quote-unquote blood. Escaping captivity, we go back to the spot where Meryl got shot, and Snake opens a bit more to everyone on how he actually cares about Meryl and sort of feels sad for not being able to save her. Which kinda doesn't make sense, since when he got tortured, the dilemma was that they either kill Meryl or they don't. So I don't know why this whole moment about Snake feeling bad for Meryl being quote-unquote dead. I do think that this is an oversight in development, as the game is pretty decent at responding to the actions you take throughout the game and the decisions you make. This moment kind of felt weird to me, because as it later turns out, Meryl is alive and Snake is relieved to see her and is surprised, but Ocelot just seconds ago said that if you give up now during the torture, she will die. Like, she's alive right now, strongly implying that. I guess in the game's favor, you can say that Snake probably misheard Ocelot or couldn't interpret what he said because of the torture, but the game never implies that the meta text, what we are learning, is different from what Snake is learning, so I guess even that doesn't make sense. Trying to distract Snake, Naomi comes in and tells her that her grandfather was a Japanese man working for the FBI back in the day. But she just said some hours ago that she didn't have any family. Master Miller picks up on it straight away and sounds suspicious about it, but doesn't question it further, instead just leaving it. This is one thing I've seen throughout the entire game, where the game has different plot twists and different builds up from the beginning of the game that come into revelation later on. And it's fine that the game does that, but the thing is, it's sometimes inconsistent with it. Just like with the Meryl death, like the game doesn't know what it wants to do, if it wants to have the big plot twist that Meryl is alive, or giving the player the choice of saving her or killing her. The game is supposed to be a spy movie from the 80s, 90s, whatever, into a game, but I'll save that for the next section, because being in the same area as before and having a higher level key card now, we can get past the door without tripping an alarm and getting captured like we did moments ago. There's a small corridor leading to a stairwell, but wait, there's a catch. There's a camera that's about to spot you and trigger an alarm. But being smart, you can toss a chaff grenade in there and disable the camera, right? Right? Wrong. What happened is that no matter what you do, you get spotted by the camera and guards come in from all directions 24/7 until you get to the top of the tower. What's worst about this is that it's so fucking long, which isn't all that bad by itself. But what's bad is that the guards come after you all the time and shoot you from all different angles where you can't even see them because the aiming is so bad in this game and it's almost impossible to complete it without healing or dying. In the making of Metal Gear Solid, Kojima said that he focused more on the Great Escape type vibe, with you trying to escape the facility and not more shooting the enemies and trying to be all righteous hero that just kills everybody. And yeah, I can see that for majority of the game where you can just slip past the enemy, you don't even have to kill them. So Kojima, please explain to me how this tower section makes any sense with you being bombarded with enemies and not being able to fucking shoot them because they're in a corner of the screen where I can't even see them. And I don't even know how the speedrunners are defeating this level or this segment on the highest difficulty. I died like 20 times on like the normal or hard difficulty. Only after finishing the game did I learn that you can sprint and shoot, and I would have been so much happier if I learned this before and I didn't lose my fucking mind doing this tower segment. I was really enjoying the game until this moment, as the game rewarded me for doing everything stealthily and avoiding gunfights. And when there was a gunfight, it wasn't as dog shit as this. Even in this segment, I thought the game would reward me for trying to think outside the box, where I tried to hide behind a crate thinking that the guard would just rush on top of the tower and just forget I was there or start looking for me elsewhere. But no, they just keep spawning and they keep finding me behind that little shitty crate. I think I would have been fine with enemies coming to rush you and being able to avoid them. But when they're in an angle where you can't even see them and you have no time to switch to first person, you're just fucked. First person is cool in this game and they utilize it pretty well throughout the entire game. But when it's so slow to even just go into first person, and never mind the shooting with a real gun. I've seen some playthroughs of players trying to get the achievement to complete the entire game without healing a single time, and they're really struggling going through this segment. Some speedrunners even found a workaround this segment where you just glitch out because they can't be bothered doing this. Finally getting to the top of the tower, thank fuck. Solid gets attacked by Liquid in a hind helicopter and there is a small decent minigame and it's fine. You go down the tower and you can predict the gunshots and predict the gas leaks, and it's okay for what it is. It's just a small minigame. On the bridge is the segment I mentioned before with Sniper Wolf, where there are 3 guards they won't spot if you don't use first person and have a sniper rifle to take them out from a distance. Being in the communication tower, we meet Otacon yet again and talk about feelings, with how Otacon wants to help Snake and ask him if he ever loved someone and how amazing he is to be an action superhero just like him. A hero saves the day and anyone can fall in love anywhere, but if you love someone you need to be able to protect them. Like, yeah, no shit, Solid, Meryl is still alive. Like, I think Ocelot put it plainly for you that if you give up during the whatever. While showing a bit more heart, Solid asks Otacon for a favor, if he could get the elevator to work again, while Solid has a flight to SWAT, the Hind with Liquid in it. I'm happy to say that the Liquid boss fight is another good one. You only have a rocket launcher to attack the Hind, but you have to maneuver across the platform to hide from the gunfire and then either use the map or sound to know where the Hind is coming from. Funny part is that if you had a mono TV back in the day, basically no surround sound, then Campbell and Naomi roast Solid for not having a stereo TV. You defeat Liquid and the Hind explodes, and going back to the elevator we get the smartest guard in games. Otacon explains that the place he stole the stealth suits from had 4 more suits, but when he was there they were already gone, and surprise surprise, the guards took them and are ready to ambush us in the elevator. It's a small detail, but the build up is great, as you get an alert when you enter the elevator that you're exceeding the capacity limit, and the slow realization from Otacon and Solid that the guards are in the elevator with Solid is just great. Being outside, Solid gets ambushed yet again by Sniper Wolf, and the boss fight is still dog shit. Thankfully she doesn't steal any content, but what she does do is the same shit that she did in the previous fight. The scenery of the boss fight is good, but the boss fight itself is just the same one as the previous one, with the mechanics being the same and nothing really changes. Snake defeats her and eventually comes out on top, and Sniper Wolf kind of follows the path of all the other bad guys, as she grew up in a harsh environment and was taken in by Big Boss. Otacon, someone was in love with her and accepts to some extent her fate, as the wound Solid gave her was fatal and she did want to die after all. Otacon asks Solid what he fights for, and he tells him that he will only tell him when he's done here. If you scout the area a bit before going further, you can actually see a parachute in the distance, maybe from Liquid, but who knows? No, he couldn't have survived an explosion, right? Going down to the underground basement, Miller calls Solid to let him know about the story of Naomi's grandfather is bullshit, as there was no man working there according to her description. They suspect that she might be a spy, but before going any further, we spot Ravens, and yes, another boss fight with Raven, because somehow he survived the tank explosion. Boss fight itself is decent as the room is small and Raven is huge, you know, haha, small huge. And the room slowly collapses as Raven gets more and more mad. It was fun fighting him as I felt I had to use every single equipment and weapon I found throughout the game because he's just that big of a man. Feeding him, he says that he's no longer needed in this world as he believes in nature and fucking healthcare, I don't know. And tells Solid that both him and Liquid are from another world, not the world he wants to be a part of. He lets Solid know as well that the DARPA chief he saw die in the beginning of the game was not actually him but a master of disguise who just posed as him, and not giving any more leads on that. Miller calls and says that he gave the info to Campbell about Naomi as well to let him assess the situation and eventually arrest her. Finally getting to Metal Gear, we see the weapon in its glory, and going up we see Liquid and Ocelot talking about the plans that they have. They apparently have some connection to the Spetsnaz, the Russian military group, but Liquid has no desire to fulfill those promises to them, instead keeping Metal Gear for himself. He wants $1 billion from the government to cure his genome soldiers and wanting Big Boss's remains, but also a cure for a disease, Fox Die, that they tested on the Armstick president and the guy who disguised himself as the DARPA chief. Something I don't really understand with this conversation is that Ocelot asks Liquid if he still plans to keep Big Boss's dream alive, but he says he doesn't. Yet later on he says that he should call this place Outer Heaven, so I'm guessing he wants to keep his dream alive. I mean, the last base of Big Boss was called Outer Heaven, so what? I guess you can say it's like a flex against Big Boss, like haha, look at you, you had Outer Heaven, it was shit, but now I'm gonna build the Outer Heaven. I guess he just liked the idea of his idea. They see Solid and Ocelot shoots the PAL key from his hands, and I actually appreciate that the game wants us to go back, as you know, you just lost it and he shot it from your hands. So many games just have the characters lose something only for them to get it back within the cutscene, but here we actually have to go do the dirty work of finding it in the water. It's small things like this that really make me appreciate the game and having more fun with it. After getting the keycard, we need to do something similar to the previous games, as we need to get the keycard cold and hot for it to work on 3 different computers. In doing so, we get a call from Miller and Campbell saying that Naomi is in custody, and Miller telling Solid how he thinks Naomi might have something to do with the Fox Die. After this revelation, we might get the best dialogue in the game, as Naomi calls us from the cell she's in and informs Solid that she is actually a spy and has been wanting to kill Solid for 2 years now. Frank Yeager, aka Grey Fox, is her brother, and we're both taken in by Big Boss to Outer Heaven, and she felt really close to him as she had no one else around, and was rightfully mad at Solid for killing Big Boss and her brother. She admits to injecting Solid with the Fox Die virus, and she says that it's a personal virus, meaning that it depends from person to person on how it will work. But during all this time she feels she was wrong about him and kinda regrets doing it, and realizes that she might have been stuck in the past for too long. She also tells him that it wasn't really her plan to inject him with the Fox Die virus, rather it was being something she was instructed to do as part of her mission. Before telling the whole truth, Campbell cuts off the transmission and just shows how much shit Solid doesn't know and how much information all of them are withholding from him. Still having a job to do, Solid inserts the last key only to activate Metal Gear and getting a call from Miller. Surprise, surprise, it's not Miller, but it's actually Liquid Snake that has been posing as Miller, as Campbell informs Solid that Master Miller was found dead in his apartment 3 days ago. And instead of deactivating Metal Gear, Solid just armed it. With Metal Gear armed, Liquid is ready to board it, but not before spilling the beans that Solid is just a pawn in the bigger game, as he wasn't sent here to rescue the hostages and disarm Metal Gear, but rather expose everyone to the Fox Die so the government can collect the Metal Gear unharmed. It seems to not work against Solid or Liquid, as they seem to be unharmed even though they have been in contact several times now. Liquid being in the Metal Gear now, we have ourselves the 3rd Metal Gear boss fight in the franchise, and like everything else, it's so much better here as you have an actual 3D environment to move around and hide behind things and actually predict the moveset. Doing enough damage, we are joined by Frank Yeager helping us defeat Metal Gear, but unfortunately succumbs to fatal injuries. And before going, he reveals that Naomi is not his real sister but an adopted one, as he killed her parents during a mission and took care of her as an act of pity. Before dying, he just asks Solid to tell her this so she knows what a man he truly was, and not the brother she imagined she always had. Continuing the fight, we finally make the Metal Gear collapse, but not before getting tossed on it and having a hand-to-hand fight with Liquid, as he has Meryl somehow on the Metal Gear and has a bomb that will explode if Solid doesn't defeat him in time. It's a really good boss fight actually, as you have to use your hand combat mechanics you've learned throughout the game and play similar to the ninja fight where you have to plan your attacks and wait for Liquid to attack before you can get a hit in. For the boss fight though, we have a talk with Liquid telling us about the Los Enfants Terribles, the terrible children. in normal language. The experiment was that the government wanted to have super soldiers that would obey every command and prove their skill in battle, and what better man than Big Boss to be the prime candidate. Technically, Liquid is Solid Snake's brother, as they were part of the same experiment and shared the Big Boss gene. Now, you're probably wondering why they put them in the Snake timeline, and we put them in here now as they're both crucial characters in the later games, with Big Boss having a really complicated story. Just keep in mind there are different Big Bosses out there when I put them up here on this timeline. Solid hits him with that uppercut that throws him off Metal Gear, finally finishing him off, and with that takes Meryl down from Metal Gear and escapes the facility. But not before Campbell contacts Solid, letting him know that he knew all along that his mission was bogus and only helped them because they used Meryl as a bargaining chip against him. And he notifies Snake that they sent nukes to nuke the whole facility to hide everything and everyone that has been involved in this incident. But being a decent man, Campbell decides to help Solid and Meryl escape, even though it might hurt him. But another twist comes up as the Prime Minister Johnson knocks out Mei Ling and Campbell, letting Solid know that his mission is done and they're going to die now as they're sending the nukes to their location. Not having a lot of time, Solid and Meryl take the car to escape the facility. But oh no, Liquid is back and we're put on an on-rail segment where we have to shoot Liquid as Meryl is driving the car. And I just don't get this part, as you're bound to get hit by him, but it's so inconsistent trying to hit Liquid as he has an invincible phase where you can't hit him after already hitting him. Like in a fight where you can move and dodge and hide behind cover, it's fine, but when you're stationary in a car and unable to move, it's just bad, as you can't do anything because it's Meryl driving the car. The two cars crash and both of our heroes are stuck as Liquid approaches them but suddenly has a heart attack, much like the DARPA chief, confirming that Liquid and Solid aren't safe from the Foxdie virus either. Campbell contacts Solid yet again, letting him know that the Prime Minister is out of the picture now, as he contacted the President to take care of him. And as a sorry to Solid, he lets him know that officially both him and Meryl are dead and can now live without any interference. Naomi calls Solid as well, and he decides to keep Grey Fox's secret to himself, instead telling her that his last wish was for her to forget the past and live life. He tells her that Liquid died from the Foxdie virus and asking her how much time he has left, her saying that it's unclear as everyone is unique in their own way, even though he shared the same genetic code as Liquid. Going downhill with Meryl, they have a talk about life and what Solid wants to live for, answering that he might be able to live with her and revealing that his true name is David. They ride into the sunset and live in some snow, I think, according to this cutscene with the dog sled. But one more thing, Ocelot is still alive and is talking to the President himself, being a double agent for him and working against Liquid, really working for the President all along. The end. Metal Gear Solid still holds up to this day. It's a really special and unique game for its time, has really interesting characters and interesting plot. After the main game, there's still some content for people who are looking for more, such as VR mission, being able to do different challenges and replay different levels. There are even challenge levels where you can play as Grey Fox, having more mobility and being able to jump on ledges and whatnot. There are also semi-cutscenes showcasing Solid before he went onto the mission and giving a little bit more context to him as a person and what happened before the mission. They showed that Solid was dragged into the mission from retirement, and because he's such a good boy, he decided to help out, especially that he has ties to Big Boss, the man he killed so many years ago. There's also an alternative ending to the game though, the minigame I mentioned earlier where Ocelot tortures you if you actually give up. Meryl dies, like I said, and instead you get an ending with Otacon, but the canon ending is with Meryl. There was a remake of the game made in 2004 called Twin Snakes, more going into the gameplay style of the next game, Sons of Liberty. Since I didn't know how to play the remake because I couldn't get it emulated, I instead opted for the original game from the Master Collection. The gameplay of the remake seems fairly similar to Sons of Liberty, but other than that, the cutscenes are just way over the top even for Metal Gear. Sometimes it does feel as there wasn't enough time to fully develop our some characters, or some inconsistencies with the characters like Campbell, being kind of a secret agent, clearly not laying out everything but still cares for his daughter and Solid. He clearly shows that he's not comfortable with sharing information to Solid, but then sometimes he just does it anyway. At the end of the game I get it, because everything is starting to come out, so there's no reason for him to withhold that information. But then at the other times he's just like, nah, I'm not gonna tell you anything. I guess it was part of the plan to only lay out a little bit information for Solid, but not the whole plan. I know the title of the game is tactical espionage with people betraying you like they do in spy movies, but sometimes it can be a bit too much, and especially in the upcoming games. One thing that surprised me is that Master Miller is actually dead, like the Miller that had so much screen time in Phantom Pain just dies off screen. It's unfair to criticize the game for this, and I'm guessing Kojima saw some potential in Miller as a character and wanted to give him more screen time in Phantom Pain and other games. I feel Naomi, Mei Ling and Natasha are done the best with the codec and staying consistent and having a simple backstory to follow and understand their motives and how they are. Of course, Solid is the star here and is done really well with showcasing care, but also his soldier's instinct from the first 2 games and how he has done with all this bullshit. He is a harsh person, but rightfully so, as he doesn't remember anything apart from war, and during this mission he learns to evolve and become a better person, not just a soldier. He is rather mean to Otacon in the beginning of the game, but later on shows compassion with the death of Sniper Wolf and encourages him to be a braver person. Meryl is a mixed bag for me, as she's just Campbell's daughter wanting to be a soldier but then regretting it when shit hits the fan. I don't dislike her, but I'm not the biggest fan of her apart from being a stepping stone for Solid to evolve further. Something happened that has never happened to me before with a video game is that I had a lot of questions about the universe and the different elements of it, and I actually got the answers for it. Such as with Foxdie, if it's a virus, why doesn't it kill Meryl or someone else? It targets a specific gene in the body and slowly killing the person, basically a gene private message actually going to the person it's directed towards. How is it possible for Snake to survive this many gunshot wounds and survive in this harsh weather? It's because of the nanomachines in his body that allow Intel to give him a morphine boost or actually repair his body. It's all really good and just shows how much effort went into making this world and everything around it to make sense. I really like the question the game asks of Solid, if he's just a guy with the genetics of one of the greatest soldiers alive, or is he a person capable of being something else and stand on his own ground? It's simple, but I like it. Is Solid gonna follow his genetics, or is he gonna evolve and become a better person overall? Just the idea to make this insane army based on the greatest soldier alive is insane to me, but really interesting to follow. What did the man do to prompt such a reaction from everyone to make him the greatest soldier alive? Going further we'll get the answer, but also get a lot of retcons and shit that just doesn't make sense. There are many details in the game, there are just too many to list, and fine, I'll talk about some of them. In the beginning of the game, depending on how fast you complete the tutorial area, Campbell will say different things such as,
"It's Snake. I'm in front of the disposal facility."
Excellent, Snake. Age hasn't slowed you down one bit.
The disposal facility.
That took a long time. I guess you're feeling a little rusty.
When Meryl gets shot by Sniper Wolf the first time, you can actually shoot her and everyone on the codec will justifiably be mad at Snake for trying to kill her.
Why? Snake.
Snake, what the hell? Are you trying to kill Meryl?
You've gone insane?
The suppressor in the game works similar to real life, meaning that mid-distance most enemies won't hear the gunshot, but if you stand close enough to them, they hear it and get alerted. When you pick up your gear after the torture scene with Ocelot, there is a bomb in your equipment. Tossing it away, you can call Miller, who almost slips up with him being liquid.
Master, I don't remember telling you that I was part Japanese.
In the room where you heat up the PAL keycard, there is a segment where you have to crouch to avoid a metal obstacle, but you can just blow it away with a rocket launcher or a grenade. Majority of these details I found throughout Adamir and Kael, so thanks for the cool details and go check him or them out. The story presented in the game is really good and on par with Phantom Pain for me. I can start to see why people are saying at the very least that the stories are different or differently structured from Phantom Pain. The different approaches the game takes to tell a story with its own gameplay where it actively wants you to explore the map and invest yourself in the story. There is something different and special about calling your different bodies to either save your game or learn about a new weapon you acquire, in a sense immersing yourself as Solid Snake. The cast of characters is really good, with everyone having their own traits and reasons to why they are helping or are good at what they are doing. I can see why a lot of people hold this game to such high regard, and I couldn't disagree apart from minor issues I have with the game, such as some plot holes in the story like Grey Fox being able to survive 3 different explosions, or Raven being able to survive a tank exploding. It could be that they want to show the player how powerful they truly are, but what do I know? I guess at the time there wasn't much interest to invest into a more lengthy voice acting or just development time, as I really do like the romance between Solid and Meryl, but we spent barely any time with them together. But to be fair, they do have some in-depth conversation and you can excuse it as just them falling in love. Like I said before, I don't like the way they handled Miller, as we get more backstory to him in Phantom Pain. And it did feel scummy with him just being killed off screen, essentially not being able to see see how he was post Phantom Pain. Yet again, it goes again with writing a story for something that was already established from the beginning. It's interesting for me and quite complicated playing these games in order after just playing Phantom Pain, since it's supposedly one of the first games in the universe timeline, and yet they do shit that's never mentioned in the older games. We later find out Big Boss is quite a complicated character, and the same problem persists with him just being killed and portrayed as a standard villain with nothing more to him. There is more history to him later on, but that's the problem, it's just later on. It's quite difficult to analyze and critique a series since there's a massive change throughout the games, and especially with a franchise like Metal Gear. With the mess that Kojima started all the way back in Metal Gear, I guess it's pretty well done, but as a whole, looking at everything through another lens makes it a little bit more complicated and difficult. I do have to give more praise to the game, as it actually gives a shit about the stories and the cutscenes. You can quite tell that the game goes for a spy thriller, as there are double crosses everywhere and mystery characters with ulterior motives. The characters are unique and quite interesting, such as Psycho Mantis having the super ability of reading your mind and predicting your moveset, Sniper Wolf being accustomed with the harsh environment around her and needing to move around out of necessity, learning how to use a sniper rifle to defend her and her flock. She does remind me quite a bit of Quiet from Phantom Pain, but instead of being quiet, you know, she talks. And the only real resemblance is that they both use a sniper rifle. There's also another bad guy, I would say. It's Octopus or something, the guy who disguised themselves as the DARPA chief, but does he really have a character? I mean, he just disguised himself and then that's it. He dies later on, like we barely interact with him. Raven is quite odd as he's the one with nature, so he's like a shaman or a monk. I like him, but I dislike him at the same time. Like, he's just vague with his words, like, oh, nature will take his course, the tree would take your life, or whatever dumb shit he'll come up with. I guess they wanted to have a twist on this character because most brutes and like big guys are dumbasses, but he's quite smart and like being interactable with the nature. I guess they tried to do something there, but it didn't really work out for me. Liquid though is a bit odd for me, as I don't know if I like him or not. His motive seems unclear at the best, with him not really knowing if he wants to pursue his own dream or Big Boss's. There is more to come from him in the later games, but as of this game, I guess he's pretty okay. The twist with him being Miller is meh. I like it as you spend a bit more time with Liquid and learn more about him, but thinking about it, he almost knew everything and that makes him all the more incompetent. I guess it was part of Liquid's plan to lead on Solid to arm the Metal Gear, but I don't know, it just feels like Liquid is kinda incompetent. It is later revealed that the clones of Big Boss possess different genes from him, like the dominant one, recessive gene and whatnot. Solid got the recessive one and Liquid the dominant one, hence why he wants to build an army and take over the world, I guess. It really struck me learning this information that he got the dominant gene, because it didn't really feel like that in the game. I mean, he is the leader of the Genome Soldiers, but other than that, he just feels like a grunt or just a normal soldier. Ocelot isn't really all that special given the context we get for him in the later game, as he's just a guy who's good with guns and fast with them, hence why he's called Ocelot, I assume. He's more prominent in the upcoming game, but in this game he just feels like a lackey for Liquid. We get the twist that he double-crossed Liquid all along, but it's really interesting seeing Solid, who found out he's a clone of another man trying to make a name for himself and somehow stand out. If you right now the person you are, how would you feel knowing that you're almost an exact copy of another person? All your qualities, good or bad, are from that man. Can you even do something on your own, or would your genes just from this person influence you and basically remove free will from you? This is why I also like the ending of Naomi saying that everyone has their own personal code within their genes. Despite almost having everything from another person, you can still be on your own, good or bad, just like Liquid and Solid. This is why I like Solid all the more, the contrast between him and Liquid. Liquid being an all-time villain trying to destroy the world, meanwhile Solid just wanting to save it and not really caring about anything else. As a whole, the game is a really good package, worth playing today, and I'm happy I got the chance to play it and talk about it, because it is truly special, and despite the being run-of-the-mill spy game, it still tries to do its own thing and tell an interesting story that can get really convoluted.